Today on the After the Timeout podcast, we are joined by Coach Quinn McDowell. Coach McDowell is the assistant men's basketball coach at Lehigh University and of AreteHoops.com. It's a great episode to start your thinking for the off season, as Coach McDowell does a tremendous job of simplifying concepts and skills for all levels.
All right, so we are joined by Coach Quinn McDowell for this episode. For the opening tip, Coach, we wanted to talk to you, to many coaches that want to help others in the profession, grow as coaches themselves. Obviously, that's a mission of yours. You put out fantastic content. You're one of my personal favorite Twitter followers. So can you just take our listeners through, kind of why you started to do it? What's your goal? And how can they find more information about the things you put out?
Yeah, well, thanks. I really appreciate that. It's mostly, truthfully, it's a selfish thing for me. I think that the public platform, or whether it's Twitter, a website, or an email list or whatever, I think anytime you do work in public, you're really forced yourself as a coach to kind of clarify the things that you think and that you believe to actually be important. And, are these things that if I was on a receiving end of this, would this be something that would actually help me? Would this be something that I would be interested in? Like, those are all, I think, things that run through my mind. And especially now as an assistant coach, I think it's so important to try and find ways to build your own philosophy while being in an environment where you can learn from others. And so that's kind of like a little bit about the mission behind kind of why I put out what I put out. A lot of times it's just like, clarifying what you believe, learning new things, and then trying to figure out if you can help somebody else along the way. I kind of started, I've always had like a love for writing. It's something that kind of had a background in kind of from when I got my college education, and then even when I started playing as a pro. And obviously kind of the online space and people that are sharers has evolved a lot in the last few years. But it's a cool community to be a part of.
Well, coaches, if you don't follow Coach, he's a phenomenal follow with some great simplified content that I'm going to get into later in the episode that Todd and I will talk about. But just a little bit for, as we go forward here, tell our listeners a little bit about Lehigh basketball, some things going on in your program, maybe some player highlights, or some information about your conference, some things you guys do X's and O's wise. Tell our listeners a little bit about Lehigh.
Lehigh is a great place. I'm very lucky to work with great student athletes that really have a great perspective on life and on basketball. Guys that really are passionate about being the best players that they can be, but also understand at some point they'll do something different with their life in basketball. We have about 10 guys playing professionally overseas right now and in the NBA. So we get guys that come here and really want a high level education, but at the same time are really, really passionate about working on their craft and want to do it at the highest level for as long as possible. So I think that's a cool and unique spot to be in. Consider myself very fortunate. Our head coach has been here 20 years, a guy that I can learn a lot and have learned a lot from. And, and then beyond that, it's just, we probably play in one of the better Division I academic conferences in the country. So there's a unique mix of things here, and it's an exciting time to be a part of Lehigh.
Yeah, and you got a Chicago guy. I believe, from Notre Dame, right?
A couple Chicago guys.
Yeah, a couple Chicago guys.
Yeah, Evan Taylor and Jamero Wilson, both hail from the area.
All right, so I wanted to, we're kind of looking through your bio, you went to Moeller High School in Cincinnati. For our listeners who don't know, Moeller High School has tremendous programs in just about everything. I wanted to get in with you. And obviously, Coach, you're one of those tremendous players. I mean, you're on the Wikipedia page, so you got to be rocking it.
That's news to me.
And, and I knew it, I was a baseball guy growing up, so I kind of heard it through baseball with, Barry Larkin and Ken Griffey and all that. But now looking back at it, can you talk a little bit about like the culture and kind of what went on there that made all those programs so successful? Obviously it's great coaches, great administration, things like that, but it just seems like in all their programs, it's just such high level, success. And that's just hard to do no matter where you are.
It really is. They've had a sustained run of success, over the course of the last, really 4 or 5 decades, going back to the 70s, when the football program kind of was at the top of the national rankings, across the country in high school football. So there is something special in the water there. I couldn't have been asked for a better education before my, education, in college, and just the preparation I got there, not only from the coaches, but being around other really high level, motivated athletes and men for 4 years just prepares you in a way that I think maybe a lot of kids don't get at the high school level. Our program was run like a college program. And so we watched film and had scouting reports and, had a strength coach and, had off-season programming and, all that kind of stuff that to the extent that you're allowed to do it, it was run like a college program. We had a binder of, and speakers come in and like, so when I got to college, it was really something that wasn't a huge culture shock for me because I kind of already been through it. And there's a standard of excellence that kind of is a common thread throughout, Moeller as a school. And there's so much pride from the people that, came before you. And then obviously, the people that wear the jersey after you. There's a quote in our locker room that says, drink the water, but remember who dug the well. And that's kind of just a reminder that there's been a lot of people that put a lot of hard work to, get the programs where they are. And then obviously continuing that tradition is a huge privilege.
So then I wanted to transition to your college playing career and your pro playing career. If our listeners look up Coach, he could ball. He could get some buckets. He's a darn good ball player. But you played in a lot of different places. You played in Australia. You played G League. Obviously your college career. I think you ended up in Latvia. And we always just find it interesting to hear kind of those stories and the path because everybody's so different, but they also learn so many things through that experience that they take with them.
Yeah, I played 4 years of college basketball at William and Mary down in Virginia, and we were in the Colonial Conference, one of the better mid-major conferences in the country at the time, and competing against teams like VCU, when Shaka Smart was there, and Old Dominion had a couple of NBA players, Kent Bazemore, George Mason had made a Final Four run right before I got there with Jim Larinaga. So there were some really high level teams, and to be honest with you, our program didn't have a ton of history success. And so, when I arrived, we were really trying to battle to be kind of in contention, within the league. And I was really proud of some of the steps we were able to take as a program while I was there. And now if you go and look at like my the records that we had during my 4 years there, we didn't have great years every year, but I was really proud of the culture that we were able to build. And then they finally started getting a little better players once I left, and really started to reel off some really impressive seasons, and the program's in a great place now. And after that, I don't know, for whatever reason, I wasn't burnt out. I continued to have a love for the game and try to carve out a niche as a pro, and it's difficult. And even though I scored like 1,600 points in college and had a decent career, like it's so competitive. A part of that is, my position, and probably I don't bring quite the same level of athleticism as, maybe some of the, what some of these programs overseas are looking for. But I was proud of, kind of the way in which I was able to persevere and kind of just like figure it out. I mean, like you said, I played in, I made an NBA, G League roster. I played in Australia for a few years. I had tryouts with, teams that I never thought I would have a chance to make, and did well. Spain and Latvia, and each of those had their own unique experience and no unique kind of place in my development as a person, in my development as a player. But the ability to see the world, to get those experiences, is something that I will never trade, and that was really valuable for me. I think I would have continued playing, but I ended up having a bad injury that kind of cut my career short after about 4 years.
So I always kind of find this interesting. This is an interesting follow-up. I just kind of popped up. We've asked a couple of players that have played pro, but what was your welcome to the pros moment? Was there somebody you went up to that you're like, oh man, they're just kind of giving it to you, or you're like, oh, okay, this is a whole nother level. I think everybody probably kind of has that moment.
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember playing CSKA Moscow when I was in Latvia at a club called VEF Riga, and we were part of the VTB league at the time. I don't know if this same league is still around, but CSKA Moscow and Khimki and some of the other big clubs out of Russia, they have 20, 25, 30, $40 million budgets, payrolls, salaries. And I remember playing CSKA Moscow. We were in the game for half, and then they kind of decided to try in the second half. And for anybody that follows international basketball, Milo Stila-Dosic, who's had a cup of coffee in the NBA, I think at various points, but probably one of the best point guards in the world outside of the NBA, and just an incredible player. And he decided to try in the second half. I think we lost by 30 or something like that. So, it's moments like that. And, DJ Kennedy, I remember playing him. The dude is just, he's as good of a scorer as there is in the world, but nobody would ever heard of him because he's not an NBA player. So just stuff like that is really fun and cool memories to have.
Those are the great stories. Those are the stories. I think those are the kind of stories that Todd and I really like to hear and share. I was going through just for fun. You definitely are on the Moeller High School Wikipedia page. You are with Ken Griffey Jr. and Barry Larkin and Chicago's own Tom Waddle. So you're up there, Coach. See?
Yeah, that I don't know. That must be a mistake. I mean, those guys and so many good players, and even recently, within the basketball program, Miles Deuce Miles McBride is now with the New York Knicks, so there's been a kind of a run of NBA players here. Jackson Hayes with the New Orleans Pelicans. So those guys were, they've really had some really cool athletes come out of that place in the last, 30, 40 years. It's been awesome.
Well, to kind of just go back to, and tell me if I'm pronouncing it right. Arete Hoops, is that how you pronounce your Twitter page?
Yeah, Arete is kind of it's a strange name, yeah, and that's a lot of people pronounce it like that, and that's probably pretty accurate. It actually, you guys asked about my history at Moeller High School. Arete was kind of like a key kind of term or phrase for us within our basketball program, and really it's just a Greek word for excellence. And it just means kind of this, just kind of a reference to this idea of the daily pursuit of excellence and the habits that you build around, what you do and who you want to become. And so when I was playing overseas and just kind of messing around on the internet and all that kind of stuff, I don't know, just kind of that name kind of came to me. So that's kind of where the genesis of the name came, but definitely not the easiest thing to pronounce, which probably is bad for marketing, but who knows?
Well, but I wanted to get into, as I kind of alluded to in the opening tip, you do produce some fantastic graphics that just break, offense and defense and things down in a very simplified form, that makes it easy to understand and kind of easy to think through for coaches. So for our listeners, how would you recommend a new coach sits down to kind of decide, hey, this is the system I want to try. This is the things I want to do. How would you recommend that process starting for maybe a listener who, we have a lot of listeners who are high school coaches, first year coaches. What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, because, there's so many, especially now, like I said, kind of this this explosion of like kind of this culture of sharing, which is awesome for the game. And there's so many people out there doing it now that you can come across so many good ideas that a lot of times it can be really hard to sift through. Like, you just see everything in front of you. And so, and it's really, it's almost like you're a kid at a candy store and you're like, I like that. And I like that. And, wait, I also really like that. And it can be really, really difficult, at least, in my experience, to just kind of figure out like, what are the things that are going to work for me, and so that's kind of like the idea behind, some of the things that I try to put out, is just trying to simplify it and help, not tell people what to think, but try to help them figure out how to think. And so I think that skill is more important than really anything else, is knowing how to build your own system, because you can copy somebody else, but at the end of the day, if you don't really believe it or understand it, then it's not really going to do you any good. I don't think in the long term. You can get some benefit by copying others, but what if something goes wrong? Well, now do you know how to fix it, or do you know the reason behind the reason why you did that thing in the first place? And so that's kind of the idea behind it. And like I said at the open, selfishly for me, it's also just a way to kind of like clarify my own thinking, so that hopefully one day when I'm a head coach, like, I think there's so many, at least guys that I've talked to, that their role as an assistant is so different from being a head coach. Now, you can never, do the job before you do the job. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say that it does, if you at least start to think in that direction now, then you might have a better chance of kind of building something that makes sense to you and to your team at some point in the future.
So I think with that frame of mind, with that thinking you actually just said, you began your career, I believe, at the D3 level as an assistant. I was a D3 assistant myself. And I remember being there. I was at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. I was on the women.
Yeah. Okay.
With that frame of mind, what were some of the things? I remember my first year at the collegiate level, I learned a lot. What were some of the things you learned in that first year of coaching that you still carry with you today? And was there anything that you learned in that first year of coaching that you were like, that kind of surprises me a little bit?
Yeah. I think you learn something new every year if you're open to it, and so hopefully there's never a year that goes by that's like, oh man, I didn't really learn anything this year, because no team is the same, so every team is different, and no, like, the way that the year unfolds is never going to be the same. And then you break it down even further, like, no game is the same, no single play is the same. So there's so many different, variables within building a program and building a great team, that I think the best coaches obviously are the ones that are continuous learners, and ones that are open to new ideas. And when they settle on something, they at least have an idea of why they settled on that, that thing instead of the other thing. So, but the first guy I got to work for, Dave Macedo at Virginia Wesleyan, was a guy that, had a style all his own. A guy that I was super fortunate to kind of get my introduction to, college coaching from. A guy that was a servant leader, guy that swept the floor every day before practice. A guy that really, put connection with his players as one of the highest priorities, and who was, never like ask you to do something as an assistant that he wouldn't be willing to do himself as a head coach. And so I think that example was something that was invaluable to me, and just seeing that you want to work for a guy like that, and you want to work hard for a guy like that, and the players for the most part, like, really respected him, and not always, like, I can't say that they always thought he was, right. No player ever does, but they knew that he had their best interest at heart, and that's why he's been able to be pretty successful. So that was kind of my first introduction to college basketball.
All right, so I want you to put on your head coaching hat. You get to take over a team, tomorrow, and obviously we know personnel and all that makes a difference. But you have your perfect fit, your perfect world. what are some things you would like to run offensively and defensively? Give us a little bit about your style and kind of things you like.
Yeah. I mean, I played in the Princeton offense in college. It was a perfect fit for my skill level, or level, that's for sure. It made me a lot better than I was, and also just kind of how I thought the game. So I think that I would run some kind of version of 4-round-1, whether that's like, full on Princeton, or whether it's kind of like some kind of continuity, ball screen mixed in there, whatever it might be. Like the 4-round-1 spacing is probably what I'm most familiar with and just would be able to teach the best. I do think that your offense and defense should be connected. So like whatever you're trying to accomplish offensively should be complemented by your defense, and whatever you're trying to accomplish defensively should be complemented by your offense. And so I think that I would probably tend to lean towards like more of like a gap pack principles from like a defensive philosophy standpoint. And I think those things can actually work pretty well together. Princeton teams tend to have really long possessions. They tend to have multiple actions, multiple sides of the floor in the same possession. They tend to try to continue to play offense until the defense can make a mistake. And then from a defensive standpoint, I do love the connectedness that it takes to be a really good team defensively when you kind of come from that school of thought, from like a pack principles kind of philosophy. So those are like general strokes. Obviously, there'd be a million different details that would get ironed out, or that I would adjust or tweak based on like who we can recruit consistently, what the other teams in our league are doing, all that kind of stuff plays into it. But at the core of it, I would be a sharer, like from an offensive standpoint. Like I would not be a heliocentric offense as much as I could possibly do that. Now, if we just get the best players in the league every year, then maybe we just simplify it really, and we just kind of do it that way. But most jobs that you get, especially as first-time head coach, aren't those jobs. So.
All right, so let's dig into a little bit of the Princeton actions. I know I've seen when you post about your 7 or 8 favorite actions, and now you see those actions, even if it's not a true Princeton offense, right? You see those things incorporated in almost everywhere, right? NBA, wherever you go, you see a lot of that. So maybe go into a little bit of detail about some of your favorite actions and how teams can kind of incorporate it, whether they're full Princeton or just want to have a couple of those concepts, and maybe they have a player that could run some of those things within whatever they're doing system wise.
Yeah, there's a couple of I think broader conceptions or like beliefs about the Princeton that maybe aren't totally true. Number one is that it's complicated. I don't think it's any more complicated than having guys remember 25 different like set plays. I think it actually is probably a lot easier to run. So I've got a whole course on this and the whole deal, but like I basically break it down into 7 like key actions that can all fit together, and you can flow seamlessly from one to the other. And so, I could go into those maybe later. I don't know if that's as important as at the end of the day, offense is spacing and spacing is offense. So what a lot of the Princeton alignments give you is they give you 4-round-1 spacing or 5-out spacing. They give you the ability, so back to my original point, I don't think Princeton is complicated. I think it gives you great spacing. And I think it actually can be used. There are a bunch of teams across the country that will use it, not because they're just an unbelievable shooting team, but because they actually have guys that are really good off the bounce, and they just use the alignments in order to attack the paint off the dribble more than they do, just spread you out and shoot a ton of threes. And the second thing is that it opens up the entire middle of the floor for post-ups. So if you have guards and or bigs that can post up, it's a great offense to get to post mismatches, to get dribble drives. And then, what you commonly think about with the Princeton is to shoot a lot of threes. But that's not necessarily the only thing that you can do. So kind of those 3 tenets, depending on like what your personnel is built for, really you can adjust the system based to fit kind of what you're trying to accomplish.
So I find this question interesting, especially with the things you put out there. For you, what are some of the mistakes you think coaches maybe make when they're thinking about X's and O's? Whether it's maybe they're thinking about too many things, maybe they see all these cool concepts and they keep trying to add. But what are some things you think maybe some coaches make when they're thinking about X's and O's?
X's and O's specifically. This is my bias, and I know this is my bias. I don't think you can offensively you can be great unless the offense has an advantage from like an instincts, like has an instinctual advantage over the defense, meaning that I know where I want to go and what I want to do before the defense actually knows where I want to go and what I want to do. And that's, that, like I said, I know that's my bias because that's how I played in college. I knew where to cut, how to read, all these kind of things, before the defense knew where I wanted to go. And I had multiple options to do this or do that, depending on what the defense was giving me. And so to that point, I think a lot of times coaches don't get good at anything. They just get mediocre at like a bunch of things. And a lot of times that comes from either overcomplicating it or putting too many things in or putting like the wrong things in that don't fit their personnel, or not having the back end skill development to actually like develop those instincts. Like there's a million different ways you can go wrong with it. But I think at its core, it's like you want your offense to play with freedom, but to play with pace and force. And to do that, you have to develop instincts in your players. And whether that's giving them, alignments that they can be confident in and knowing what they want to do and where they want to do it, or if it's just putting them in situations where they know how to make the right reads. Either way, I think my point is the same, is that you have to simplify it to the point and give your players clarity to the point where they're able to play with instinct on the floor. And I think a lot of coaches either don't think through it enough to like simplify it down enough, for the things that they want to work in practice, or the kind of their install, like the install of their offensive concepts and schemes throughout the offseason and throughout the year, or they just they don't know how to teach it well, or they stop practice too much and they try to like micromanage teams through sets. So like I said, there's a million different mistakes, but those might be a few.
All right, we ask a lot of coaches this, but you talked about instincts and things like that, and obviously you have the luxury of kind of recruiting your players, and you can kind of see that and find players that fit. But for our younger levels, our high school coaches, even our youth coaches, what are some of the things that coaches can do to start developing those instincts and reading? And I kind of call it just playing basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point you gotta just play basketball, whether it's the end of a shot clock, whether it's the defense, you have a game plan and the defense comes out and the other team does something you weren't expecting, right? You have to boil it down to having those instincts and playing basketball. So at the younger levels and at the youth levels, in through high school, how can we start? What are some things coaches can do to develop those skills?
There's a lot of research kind of that goes into like what helps people build skill, and really at the end of the day, it's all knowledge is contextual knowledge. So you can't learn outside the context of the thing that you're trying to learn. So what I mean by that is that like there's a base level of knowledge that you need to learn, and then you have to be put into the situation in order to pick up the cues, in order to build the real-time awareness of how to apply that knowledge. And that's what we call skill. So skill is just the application of the knowledge that you have, and the fluidity and the speed at which you're able to do it. So sometimes like Doug Lemov is wrote a great book, like A Coach's Guide to Teaching, and he breaks a lot of this down, where he really just talks about how like the best players don't actually move faster a lot of times, they just move sooner. Or there's been numerous studies which like look at grandmasters in chess don't actually have better like they don't have better memory in general. They have better memory within the specific context of what they've been trained to do. And that's like looking at the game of chess. So they can recall patterns and, pieces on the board and placement. And it's the same thing in the game of basketball. So I think teaching, number one, you have to have a baseline of skill, and you have to continue to improve that skill just through blocked practice, whether that's ball handling, dribbling, passing, shooting, but then it has to be put into some kind of basketball game context where decision making is learned and repeated over and over and over again. So that's kind of how I would reverse engineer it, is like, what are the skill or what are the outcomes that you want from like you're talking about a youth level? Okay, I just want our guys, our players who I want them to be, so say like in a pick and roll, for example, if we break it down, like in a pick and roll, I want them to be able to recognize whether the big defender is hedging, switching, or their drop back, right? And then out of those three things, you just give them like three competencies that you want them to be able to do. On a hedge, I want them to be able to throw ahead or throw behind. On a if somebody goes under, I want to teach how to like rescreen, right? So, and there's different ways, like there's a million different, scenarios in which, but I'm just using the pick and roll as an example. And then you drill that in practice, whether it's like small sided games, or you give them like controlled scrimmages or all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of like how I would mentally process like the kind of the reverse engineering of it in helping like skill acquisition, skill development.
So you mentioned earlier being connected on the court, right? You were talking about with your pack line and things like that. I want to talk to you a little bit about helping your team being connected on the court, right? For in your situation, right, you're getting players from all different kinds of programs, different terminology from wherever they are, and now you're trying to get them all on the same page with your stuff and communicate the same way. A high school setting, you have different players every year. You graduate some seniors, you have a younger team, like with John and I in the girls game, a lot of times maybe you tend to bring up a younger player. So what are some things maybe you do or suggestions you have for helping your team become connected on the court and growing that communication and not only on the court, but off the court?
Yeah, connection is huge. Connection on team. You can tell when a team's connected, right? Like there are visible signs of it. So number one, I think it starts with like spelling out what if connection is your goal, like what are the tangible behaviors that we do repeatedly as a team that exemplify and build connection within our program. So whether that's like, helping people up after they dive on the floor, whether that's, everybody stands up after they, that come out of the game, whether that's everybody huddles after a dead ball, whatever it is, like, different body language things in practice. There's a million different like tangible outcomes that you could kind of like try to enforce and reinforce with your group. But then from a more like philosophical level, I do think that your team needs like some grounding of like a core identity within kind of a vision and values, a core values, kind of a core behaviors, and a core purpose, like kind of framework. So, and usually that comes from the head coach. I guess maybe at the high school level, sometimes it might come from like the athletic department. I don't know, but there has to be, I think, some kind of alignment, and the more alignment and continuity that there is, especially if you're a head coach at a program and you're there for a number of years, the more that I think upperclassmen who have been kind of through, the learning process of, what is our core identity, and then how does that actually like translate to the court and within our program, actually help to, teach younger players and newer players that come up through the program, at a younger age. And hopefully there's that mentorship that gets passed down from kind of upperclassmen to younger classmen. But I do think it has to have something to do with the head coach, because if you don't actually care about it or believe in it, then they won't either.
So I seen a lot of your graphics about offense and defense and layers and culture. I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about scouting and creating scouting reports. And for you, what are some of the elements that are most important in a scouting report that a coach should include? And then, for some coaches, maybe what are some elements that are in scouting reports that, let's be honest, may not be that important or kids don't really pay attention to, or maybe the kids are paying attention to it and don't really need to be paying attention to it. So kind of take us through your thoughts on scouting reports.
Yeah. I do think every head coach is wired a little differently. So, as an assistant, that's you're a little bit subject to like kind of what your head coach believes in and what they think is important and what's not important. I would say, at Lehigh, we're pretty detailed. We try not to leave any stone unturned. I really believe that the depth and the detail that I go into as an assistant is so that I can now make it as clear and as clear as possible, not only to our team, but to our head coach about what do we need to do to win the game? Like, what do we actually need to do to win the game? So what are the 2 or 3 things that, like, if we do these things, we put ourselves in a great position to be successful? But to get to that place actually takes a ton of work, because you actually have to understand the big picture and the nitty-gritty details in order to like kind of filter all that stuff out and then kind of present kind of what is like a game plan to either your head coach and obviously to your players. So I really try to like be thematic in my presentations to our team. I really try to and those themes can be totally different from week to week. Sometimes it might be more of like a culture thing, like a toughness, and here are the ways that toughness specifically, like you can't let them go right, like they always want to go right, like on their dribble drives or whatever it is. But like figuring those things out, I think actually it's like a process, and it's sometimes a long process. So I would say like I'm pretty thematic in kind of how I think about things, because I know that for the most part, our guys are not going to remember all the minute details, but if I keep repeating the same themes over and over again for 2 days or whatever it is that our prep time is heading into a game, then I think that I hopefully give them at least kind of I'm priming them for like hopefully what is successful execution of like what we're trying to get across. So at the end of the day, like when you get in a game, you're not going to remember most of the stuff you run through unless maybe the coach is calling it out from the sidelines. And obviously we go over key actions and all that kind of stuff. But even then, like if there's a specific play that we think is really dangerous, we'll go over that. But a lot of times it's just like going over concepts and basic concepts of like, what do they really want to do on offense? Like who are they at their core? Like what makes them successful and makes them go? And then obviously personnel. I think personnel is one area that you can actually get really detailed in, and that can potentially stick for guys because they can take they can take matchups personally. It's a lot easier to like share. I think guys will review more film on personnel than they will maybe on like a set driven basis, that kind of stuff. So those are a few things that I try to do.
You actually just gave me a really interesting idea of what if you just put on the first page of your scouting report, 1 sentence, how is your team going to be successful that day? I wonder if it would really boil it down for kids.
Yeah. There could be a lot of wisdom in that. I think we all know that, like, especially now with synergy and with, whether it's huddle, like everybody knows everything about you, like from like a scouting standpoint. There really are no secrets. Like it actually comes down to execution and like your effort and your energy and your focus and your enthusiasm. But where is like specifically those like intangibles directed, like, and that's, I think, your biggest job as a coach is like to get all of that stuff pointing in the right direction.
So as we move into our last 2 segments, the first one we like to call 30-second timeout. As our listeners know, this is basically our platform to let the coaches talk about whatever subject they want to discuss. It can be about basketball. It could be about an organization they're passionate about. It could be about their family, their program. It can basically be about whatever you want to talk about. And as we jokingly say, there's no official in your timeout that's going to tell you your 30 seconds is up. So this is kind of your, as Todd would sometimes say, dime your dance floor to talk about whatever you'd like.
Okay, interesting. I would say, let's see here. What's something I would be passionate about? I would say here's a good one, especially for anybody that's at the high school level. I would say the specialization, early specialization for a lot of kids at the high school level, I think is. I'm not saying there's never a scenario in which that isn't the right choice for the kid, but I would say more times than not, early specialization will hurt you in the long run. Now, maybe like I said, I'm biased because I played 2 sports all the way through high school, and I think maybe I could have been a little bit better basketball player in the short run if I had only focused on basketball. But I think in the long run, it actually was super beneficial for me to both have that mental break and that physical variation in kind of my development and my training that ultimately allowed me to have like a longer career than maybe a lot of people had expected. So that's something I'm thinking about right now, is like, as my kids are getting older and starting to play sports and all that kind of stuff. And I think at the high school level, I know there's a lot of pressure now, like just to do one sport and not to miss any workouts and this, that, and the other. And I know all situations aren't created equal, but whenever possible, I think that you may get a better return on your investment, even as a head coach in one sport, if you're able to share, if you're able to allow the kids that want to do it to do multiple things. So that may be controversial, I don't know, but that was just kind of like, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Before we get into our quick hitters, what was your other sport then? You played basketball. Let's see, what was the second one?
Soccer.
Wow,
Yeah.
Good footwork. Good, definitely good endurance. Some of the best players we've had, especially defensively, have been at least in my experience, have been soccer players. So that's awesome. All right, so our last segment's kind of quick hitters, just kind of rapid fire, random questions. We always say some about basketball, some maybe just a little bit off the wall, but that's kind of our thing. So the first one, you mentioned obviously the Princeton, you like that, but I guess we'll tweak it. Your favorite, and you can take it out of the college because I'm sure you see a bunch of colleges, whatever you want to go with it, but your favorite maybe team, whether it be pro, it could be college, Euro, overseas, whatever. That's running maybe a unique system, or your favorite kind of system to watch, your favorite team to watch.
I mean, there's so many, but I'll just give you one I've been watching recently a lot. It's just Colorado State's offense this year has been, kind of really fun to watch, and just kind of the different mix and matches that they have. A lot of Princeton principles kind of in their philosophy there, but they've been doing it at a high level this year, so that's a cool one.
So kind of along that note, maybe a coach that you think is really good that maybe doesn't get the notoriety, or an underrated coach that others may not know about.
There's a local guy here at DeSales University, which is a Division III school. Scott Koval is a guy that is a Division III coach here, in the area. Their school's like 10 minutes away from Lehigh. I have a lot of connections to his program, and he's actually a William & Mary alum. So he's a guy that they're like 13-1 or something like that right now at the Division III level, nationally ranked. So DeSales, Scott Koval.
All right, so you guys are the Mountain Hawks, which I like, because that's a little bit different than normal Hawks. Mountain Hawk sounds a little bit tougher, right? But you underrated, or like maybe your favorite mascot name from a team?
Oh, it's got to be the Banana Slugs, right? That's
a good one. That's a good one.
That's the one that always gets the notoriety in these kind of questions, right?
Yeah, you got the Anteaters out there too. You got the Anteaters. Yeah. I like that.
All right, so we got, what's a pet peeve of yours, Coach? What's a big pet peeve?
Coaches that stop practice too much to talk too long.
I like it. It's a good one.
All right, you're in your playing days. A favorite spot or action to get your buckets?
Man, I tell you what, I averaged like 10 points a game my freshman year, and I want to say at least 6 were off of back cuts. So, the back cut was just like, it was just the timing of it. If you can get the timing of it, it's nearly impossible to guard if you have the ability to shoot the ball as well. So like, you just kind of getting, whether that's that elbow catch, from the 5-man, and just, for me, like, and occasionally I'll still practice with our guys, and I can still get the same shot. I usually don't make it because, I'm a little washed up and everything, but like,
Coach, I don't know about that. He's being
as long as you can get a couple of them, man, that defense is on their heels, and it's really tough to guard.
We saw some of your stats, Coach. I don't know. You probably can still get some buckets. I'm guessing. You're still young.
Let's be honest, though. He's a Princeton guy. He was going to say back cut for sure.
Absolutely. Well, because I knew that was the only way I could score. I wasn't taking anybody off the dribble. So.
All right. So this is our last one. Absolutely no relation to basketball. But if you had to either listen to the same 10 songs for the rest of your life, or you could only watch the same 5 movies, what would you choose?
I don't watch many movies, so probably movies.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah, that's what I would think too, because then you can keep listening to your music.
Yeah,
you got your favorite movies that you watch, and you'd be okay watching them. And
right. It's, the best 5. There's probably not gonna be too many that are better in the next, 50 years until I die or whatever. So.
There you go. I like it. Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough for jumping on here. Awesome stuff. We obviously love the content you put out, and we always like getting into different programs, especially not around this area, and learning about what other coaches do. And so we can't thank you enough. We appreciate you jumping on tonight.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Jon.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Flicky. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout, or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more coaching content in game, out of the game, and anything in between.